Well, my name, of course, is, as you probably guessed, Eric Lloyd Wright, and I'm Rupert's half-brother. We shared the same mother together, Helen Wright, and I always think it's interesting. Tristan was talking about how Anais was always hiding Rupert's identity. And in one of the diaries, she talks about how she's just overwhelmed with work and getting the diaries out and all the correspondence. But there's this wonderful man who wants to help her. And he is a wonderful friend, and he is willing to actually take a sabbatical from school. And I think he would be perfect for it because his father was educated at Cambridge, and his mother was an actress who read plays. Well, that was a perfect description of Rupert, and but he was a friend. I remember my first meeting of Anais was what I considered at the time very elegant, and I think when I saw her she was very elegant because they appeared at my father's house in Los Angeles in a Model A convertible with the top down, and she had wrapped a scarf, but she got out of the car. They'd been coming cross country, and she was spotless and just perfect, and I was just amazed at how she could maintain that. And I found her to be, for me, a very warm individual who was very supportive of who I was, and very there seemed to be a softness to her until you got to really know her, and I'll tell you, there was a backbone of real steel there that was truly amazing. And she looks thin and small, slender, and yet she was this tremendous tower of strength and energy. I was always amazed at how much work she would do. And I got really involved with both Rupert and Anais when Rupert, in trying to tie her down, I think, and hold her in place, I didn't realize it at the time, convinced her that they should have a house of their own. And of course, Anais really didn't want a house. She didn't want to be tied down. And but finally, Rupert went out, convinced her to do it. And so the three of us together worked on designing her house over in the Silver Lake area. And I would like to read a little bit of what she said about that experience. There was a house being built on the side of a mountain facing the sunset and Silver Lake. When the workmen left, I would sit on one of the walls and dream over it. There was a desert rose terrace, a garden being planted, a place carved in the garden for a pool overlooking the lake. There was a magnificent fireplace like that of a castle. The architect was Eric Wright, the son of Lloyd Wright and the grandson of Frank Lloyd Wright. I watched the roof take shape, not sitting squatly over the house, but upheld by a clear story of glass windows, which seemed to make it float in space. I watched its graceful roof extending for shade like a hand over the brow. More and more I felt I was inhabiting that house. I, who never wanted a house because it meant taking roots, was sitting there with the growth of its beauty extended delicate tendrils like those of a plant around me. The roots of the house so solidly planted in the ground, so strong of beams, so permanent of stone, were reaching to me. The stone sandblasted to give it a rough texture, so it would look like sand on the beach. The glass, which would frame the garden, the lake, the mountains, the sky, all were growing around me. The roots were being planted in pure beauty. It was the house in which I wanted to live. My wish came true. I moved into it. Everything in it was unlike other houses. The kitchen was all wood and Venetian glass mosaic tile. By the way, the Venetian glass tile was idea of Rupert and Anais, and they actually installed the kitchen counters. They created and designed the dining table, and they had the coffee table. All were made by Rupert and Anais. It had the vista of a Japanese screen, all sky, mountains, lake, as if one lived out of doors. Yet the roof, held by its heavy beams, gave a feeling of protection, while the big windows, which separated the roof from the studio, framed the flight of birds, the sailing of clouds. The clear story, the little windows just under the roof, brought your gaze upward and gave the impression that the house was filled with light. The house conformed to the Wright tradition of living both within and out in nature, of bringing nature and hearth together. They were interrelated and fused, both shelter and the freedom of the forest. The birds seemed to be eating and flying within the house. The house seemed set exactly right to contemplate the sunset. I had a little room to write in. If I sat in the studio facing the mountains, the lake, the sky, my attention wandered as it did in Mexico. I became one with the natural scene. I needed the little room with its walls of books, which did not let my wandering fantasies escape. The house seemed to have a welcoming air for visitors, but it was hidden by another house from the street, so it also seemed to have an aura of secrecy. The beauty of it was such that no matter where I came back from, Mexico, Paris, I never felt any loss, any break, or letdown. The journey continued. The lights of the houses reflected in the lake could be the lights of Acapulco or the Italian Riviera. A new life began, a new cycle. Sun and air seemed so easy to invite. Light penetrated the entire house. Music rose to the high ceilings and spread into space. People never seemed crowded together. If one walked the garden at night and looked back at the lighted room, the scene, dresses, colors, poses, seemed like a play, like Antonioni's film, La Notte. Here, I could make a film giving the curious feeling I always sought, of entering the secret life of a house. The camera could watch from the darkness of the garden a woman asleep in her bed on the right, walking or dancing or exercising in the center of the studio, serving drinks or brewing coffee in the kitchen on the left. I thought the house would be a burden, which would make traveling difficult. It never was. There was always joyous rather than regretful. The pool smelled of pittosporum. The birds came to eat. The weeping willow lanais swayed in the jungle. Noises were muffled and neighbors invisible. When earthquake struck, the house barely trembled. So that was Anais's beautiful description of the house that she and Rupert and I all built together for them.